Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of FaithU. I have really enjoyed the other speakers in this series, and it's an honor to be part of such a great lineup. My name is David Greder. I'm an assistant professor of religion and philosophy at Waldorf University in Forest City, Iowa, and it is my esteemed honor to talk to you tonight about religions of the world. Now, more specifically, I'm going to be talking about, in this context, what it's like to be a Christian in dialogue with other world religions. Now, that might come as no surprise to many of you who are watching this. Many of you through FaithU who've enjoyed the other videos know exactly who I am, and you don't need to know that I'm coming from a Christian perspective. But I say that, I put it out there as an autobiographical note because who you are and some self-knowledge is an integral part of authentic interreligious dialogue in the 21st century, and it always has been. I think that no matter what your path is on this religious life, no matter where you've been, no matter where you're going, you can always learn very interesting, very valuable things from other types of Christianity, from other faiths, from people of no faith. Without further ado, let me get started, and I need to say right off the bat that I'm going to be a little bit more abstract. In no way, shape, or form do I think I can talk about all the different world religions. I just finished here at Waldorf the previous semester going through 15 weeks with some brilliant students with a whole lineup of the major world religions from all over the globe. And even in those 15 weeks, I would get to the end of a unit and think, geez, we hardly covered even the surface. And so no way, shape, or form do I think I'll be able to cover everything in just a 30-minute talk with you. But in terms of world religions, how do we as Christians encounter other religions? One of the things that I ask is, incidentally, I'll ask you three important questions that I think will hopefully get you thinking about how you encounter other religions in your spiritual lives and in your daily lives. But a quick question is, hey, should Christianity speak with other religions? Is that a foregone conclusion? Well, I'm here to tell you, having studied the history of Christianity, it hasn't always been a given that, yes, Christians should talk to other religions. And Christians aren't alone in that endeavor. Following along, it's unfortunate that for a lot of history, there's been a little bit of the what you don't know won't hurt you. What they don't know won't hurt them. A little bit of that common sense wisdom. But we are a increasingly international, globally interconnected at faster and faster paces. Thanks to the internet and other technologies, we come in contact with other religions and people of other faiths all the time. And how do we go about navigating such a intricately networked, religiously diverse world? Wouldn't it be great if we could all just get along? Perhaps you've seen this graphic. I've seen it as a bumper sticker a whole bunch of times, and it's pithy. Wouldn't it be great if we could all just get along? But by introducing a specifically Christian context, I do need to point out that sometimes when we think of other religions, we have to think about very, very deep issues in history, and especially when it comes to truth value. Is any one religion more true than the others? Is any one religion more important than the others? You might be thinking, as part of this globally interconnected, diverse world, that, oh no, we are all humans traveling on this planet, and we are all created equal. In the words of the Declaration of Independence, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. I wish we could stop there, but there are some words from the Gospels. For example, in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's from John chapter 14, verse 6. It seems to be saying, Jesus, right straight from the Gospels, is saying you have to believe in me. In other words, it seems to be giving license to say that you have to be Christian in order to be saved, in order to know the truth. But it's important to note that those aren't the only images. That's not the only way Jesus described himself. There are a whole bunch of different metaphors and images and language that you can use to describe interreligious dialogue in the modern day, in your spiritual life and in your daily life. Well, for example, Jesus also refers to himself as the bread of life, the true vine, living water. Okay? Trying to ask, are there more true religions? Are there better religions? Can we rank these and can we pit them against one another and see who comes out on top? To me, that makes about as much sense as saying, is Jesus more the bread of life than the true vine? Or is the true vine a better way to understand who Jesus is than the living water? And the bread of life comes in third. That just doesn't seem to make much sense to me. How can we take this sort of discussion into thinking about world religions? Well, actually, as the first question that I'll be asking you in my session right now, this question of religions of the world already has a little bit of baggage with it. If you were to talk to several of the religions that I covered in previous semesters, or think of world religions today, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Confucianism, Taoism, indigenous sacred ways. Think of all these different types of religion throughout the world. It's not guaranteed that if you were to walk up to a Buddhist or a Confucianist and ask them what their religion is, they might say, I'm not a religious person. But then you ask them what sort of rituals they perform, and it becomes clear that they do follow some Buddhist meditation practices or follow some teachings of Confucianism. The word religion isn't always self-evident, and so my first question to you as attendees of this FaithU session is, what is a religion to you? How would you define the term religion? You might not believe it, but the term religion isn't as old as time. You might also, just moving back, I hate to repeat slides, but you'll notice Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus also refers to himself as the bread of life, the true vine, the living water. I don't see where he uses the word religion there. In fact, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, one of the earliest denominations, one of the earliest ways to refer to the earliest Christian community was as the way. It wasn't called Judaism, it wasn't called Christianity, it wasn't called a religion. Early Christians called themselves followers of the way. And so to put this up there, what is a religion? How would you define the term religion? Okay, now, one real quick aspect is to look it up in a dictionary. The Oxford English Dictionary refers to a religion as action or conduct indicating a belief in, reverence for, and desire to please a divine ruling power. The exercise or practice of rites or observances implying this. As I just said, if you were to walk up to a Confucianist or to a Buddhist, they might not actually consider themselves to be a religious person, and by this definition, Buddhism is considered to be a non-theistic religion, as in they do not believe in a God. Neither necessarily do Confucianists. Now, they might have rituals like meditation, and Confucianists might refer to something like virtue, or the importance of filial piety, or they might talk about the mandate of heaven as key teachings of their religious tradition of Confucianism, but they might not call themselves a religion. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, they might not also classify as a religion. The most important thing you can do in discussing religions of the world and encountering folks of other religions, ask them. The importance of self-definition in interreligious dialogue, letting each member of an interreligious dialogue speak for themselves, is a key virtue of any interreligious dialogue. In encountering any religious believer from around the world, from across a panoply of faiths, let each religious believer define themselves. In addition to letting everyone define themselves, I also find asking you what your definition of religion is to be an eye-opening experience. It certainly was for me. Make no mistake, I, as a professor of religion and philosophy, am not coming here to throw up a slide that shows you the one-size-fits-all definition of religion. And in fact, I think if you came up with a decision or a definition that fits every religion, I might be out of a job. So I just hope it's a interesting exercise for you. It also reinforces the importance of language and who is included and who is excluded. And this is another important aspect of interreligious dialogue with the religions of the world to which I'd like to turn next. And that is the language that we use to describe how we include and how we exclude and how we value differences amongst various religions of the world. And I take my cue from noted world religions scholar Diana Eck in talking about exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. And what you really want is what I like to consider to be sort of the Goldilocks approach. Too often, exclusivism is considered to be, in terms of borders or boundaries between religious traditions, a little bit too hard. Inclusivism is sort of tries to wash over any boundaries so that actually gets rid of any valuable diversity and variety. And if variety is the spice of life, you want to have some sort of differences around. Whereas pluralism might be just right. And you'll notice there's a question mark after just right because, once again, if we were to have solved the entire riddle on what it means to effectively engage in interreligious dialogue without any problems, with no violence whatsoever, everyone agrees, let's all just get together like the coexist graphic I had on previously, then I might be out of a job as well. So let's go through these terms, and I'll tell you what I kind of mean, and I'm going to ask you another discussion question once I go through these three terms. Again, taking my cue from Diana Eck, exclusivism usually has connotations of intolerance, as you see. The quotation I've included on this slide is from a medieval pope, and it says, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, or as it says in translation, outside the church there is no salvation. That's one classic example of how we are the church, we know the full truth, we are the only way to lead a religious life, and if you don't follow us, you are in for an eternity of bad news. Now, unfortunately, also, this Christian example isn't the only example of a religion saying it's our way or the highway. But this is one example of using exclusivistic language to talk about other religions, as in, yours is the benchmark by which other truth claims and religious and spiritual claims are judged, and usually that means your opponents or any other religion is going to be found lacking. Now, I hope you can see right off the bat that exclusivism, while showing deference and devotion to your own tradition, which is a wonderful thing, isn't quite as accepting, isn't quite as congenial or compassionate to people of other faiths, or indeed to other faiths themselves. And even though I started off this presentation talking about Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, nobody comes to the Father but through me, at the same time you have that truth claim on one hand, and on the other hand you have to keep remembering that Jesus himself was Jewish and that Christianity is formed in an interreligious milieu. And so how Christianity relates to other traditions has been baked into who we are from the very beginning. Now, like I say, exclusivism, it shows devotion to your tradition while perhaps drawing too hard boundaries or too stiff boundaries between yourself and other religious believers or traditions. And the opposite problem might be characteristic of something called inclusivism, whereas inclusivism is sort of like saying, hey, well, we're all on the same religious journey. We're all, as Dickens says in Christmas Carol, we're all fellow travelers to the grave. There's no difference between the two of us. We're two religious believers. We all believe the same thing. We're all one big happy family. But inclusivism kind of erases some important distinctions. What we believe and how we pray and how we practice our religions matters. The things we do matter when it comes to our spiritual and religious journeys. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. Our distinctions, our differences matter, as I tried to indicate. Removal of distinctions, even though it might seem like a great thing, like we're all one big happy family, differences matter. What makes me unique is perhaps what my friends and family value about me, and the same goes for you. What makes each religious tradition unique and its own is what makes it special and what makes it valuable for personal believers, for members of that tradition, but also as a source of value for other religious traditions in dialogue. So it's important not to erase over boundaries, but also inclusivism can have a little bit of a sinister role itself. For example, this notion of anonymous believers, which I also have on this slide. Inclusivism can sometimes come at the point of a sword. You will be part of my religion or suffer the often fatal consequences. That's a little bit of a mix of inclusivism and exclusivism. Any inclusivism that comes at the point of a sword isn't really inclusive at all. But like I say, inclusivism, whereas exclusivism drew two hard boundaries between religious traditions, inclusivism can sort of soften over boundaries and not really get at the heart of what religions are talking about. So I guess exclusivism is too hard and inclusivism is too soft. Let's turn to what's just right in the Goldilocks phrase, and that would be pluralism. Now, it's important to note that pluralism, in terms of religious studies and religions speaking to and understanding one another, has its own distinct meaning. Pluralism outside of religious studies can quite often mean something along the lines of agreeing to disagree or simple appreciations of diversity. Not that such appreciations are ever really simple, but let's dive in. Let me tell you a little bit about what I consider religious pluralism to be, and this is, as with the previous lenses of exclusivism and inclusivism, is through the lenses of the ever-brilliant Diana Eck in her Is Our God Listening? Pluralism is not the sheer fact of plurality alone, but active engagement with plurality. Like I say, too often we think of pluralism and it's agreeing to disagree, or aren't we special, we include everyone, we're so welcoming, which is its own wonderful thing. You should be as welcoming and as hospitable to people of all different faiths, backgrounds, and persuasions. But just appreciating or patting yourself on the back, that can seem a little bit like the easy part. Okay, it's further engagement. It's not the sheer fact of looking out and seeing diversity, including and especially of various religious backgrounds, but it's active engagement with fostering that plurality. As with number 2, it's not simply tolerance. It's not just appreciating that everyone is welcome here and that no active fights are breaking out. It's not just tolerance, you be you, I'll be me, and let's not talk about things that might anger either of us. In the words of Linus from the Peanuts comic strips, he said that there are 3 things he never talks about: religion, politics, and the great pumpkin. Instead, we should move beyond tolerance to active engagement and the seeking of understanding amongst different faiths. It's not simply relativism, where, okay, maybe this tradition has a monopoly on ethical teachings, but, maybe we have our own virtues in our religious faith. Maybe we think about theology a lot better than perhaps other traditions, whereas other traditions have the market cornered on beautiful forms of religious practice. It relativizes various aspects of individual faiths, intra-relativism, but also it's not as if to say that everyone has their own truth. Relativism refers to the fact that, you know what, maybe every single religion is just the same, and maybe all these religions, they're saying roughly similar things, and they're just as important as my religious faith, so maybe I can sort of not be as committed to my own faith. Instead of that sort of relativism, of saying that everyone's valid, ergo, sheesh, maybe mine isn't so great, pluralism in the religious context really fosters personal commitment. The only way you can be fully in dialogue with people of other religions is to embrace your own faith. Okay? It's a little bit like I can't be fully in dialogue with my Muslim brothers and sisters, or with my Buddhist brothers and sisters, or with my Jewish brothers and sisters, unless I am as committed as I possibly can in my own Christian faith. It's also not syncretism. Pluralism isn't syncretism. Now, syncretism, is a little bit like the blending of all religious faiths. It's not saying that I like this symbol, I like this practice, I like this artwork, I like this building, I like this other architecture, I like this form of fashion, I like these beliefs, not so much these. It's not a blending, it's not a hodgepodge of all different sorts of faiths. Again, referring back to also number 3 with the commitment versus relativism. Syncretism shows a little bit of a commitment, or a lot of bit of a commitment to your tradition and what makes your tradition special. It's not syncretism. It's not a blending of all the world's religions. It's finding what is true to your particular tradition, but also, as number 5 insinuates and comes out directly and says, being informed by, from your own position, to be informed by other religious faiths. I, as a Christian, will learn from other people who are also committed to their own Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Jain, Hindu, other faiths. Just as you should be appreciative of all differences, not icing over any differences, not drawing too hard boundaries. Also, value what makes your tradition. Come from a place of commitment so that you can be offering the strongest possible position as you engage in interreligious dialogue. This discussion of exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism actually leads me to my second question that I'd like to bring up with you today. And again, don't worry, I'll bring these up again at the end. But here goes. Question number 2. Where do you see exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your lives? Now, this was actually a helpful exercise for me when I was learning about world religions. And it helps to, for example, do this in 2 steps. Where do you see exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your lives? First of all, how about in just certain aspects of your identity or in certain aspects of your daily life? Where do you experience exclusivism? In other words, where do you draw a line in the sand and you're not going to change for anyone? Versus inclusivism, what sorts of allegiances, what sorts of, favorite sports teams, favorite hobbies, your taste in movies, music, books, that sort of thing. What sorts of things can you be a little bit more accepting of different? What more would you be willing to change, in other words? And in terms of pluralism, where do you find yourself embracing diversity, getting into heated discussions about maybe your favorite book versus someone else's, your favorite movie versus someone else's? So where do you find exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your daily lives? Now, in the second aspect of that, where do you see it in your religious life? Where do you see exclusivism, as in the things that you believe at the core of your being, where you're not willing to change? Or inclusivism, where do you see where maybe you haven't embraced certain aspects of diversity, where you've been willing to roll over a little bit too quickly, or or have given up on certain things, perhaps a little bit too quickly, versus pluralism. I can see by your engagement with FaithU that you are already one step ahead on pluralism because you're interested, you're curious about embracing other points of view and expanding your horizons. So, like I say, where do you see exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your religious lives as well? The last thing I told you about pluralism, the very final point that I pointed out from Diana X Is Our God Listening, was that one of the aims of pluralism, or one of the mainstays, the foundations of pluralism, is interreligious dialogue. And I make it sound like it's really, really easy, but all you have to do is turn on the news at night and find out that not very many religions are peacefully talking to one another. Now, I realize that here in North Iowa, it might not be as religiously diverse as, say, the Twin Cities up north, or in Chicago, or off in New York, but think you'd be surprised if you did a little bit of looking, if you did a little bit of digging, a little bit of exploring, you'd be surprised how much religious diversity there is in North Iowa. So even driving around Mason City, for example, if you were to pass a Christian church, just to speak of denominational religious diversity, if you were to pass by a Christian church, do you know what each denomination actually believes? If you were to drive past a Catholic church, do you know what Roman Catholics believe? If you were to drive by the Greek Orthodox Church in Mason City, do you know what Eastern Orthodox Christians believe? And moving beyond Christianity, do you know where the Islamic Center is in downtown Mason City? Or do you know where the synagogue is in Mason City? Like I say, I'll bet you'd be surprised at just how much religious diversity is in North Iowa. And so, how do you go about engaging in interreligious dialogue? Well, first of all, you don't need to have a theological checklist. Conversations about theology with people of other faiths, they don't need to start with explicit theological aims. They should just start as conversations amongst human beings who are interested in expanding their horizons and in communicating with one another and learning from one another. But let's say, for example, that religion does come up. How should you go about talking about interreligious dialogue? Well, like I say, I'm no expert. If you want to turn to an expert, don't believe me. Believe a Harvard theologian and Lutheran Church of Sweden Bishop of Stockholm, Christer Stendahl, who came up with a few rules, in his words, for interreligious dialogue. These are the three things that, if you break these, too many people do these days. For example, number one, when trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion, not its enemies. Okay, too often we rely on second-hand knowledge. We rely on opinions and rumor and gossip. When, like I believe I've already said, if you want to know what a person believes, ask them. Let people self-define and self-identify. And certainly the last thing you should do if you want to know about what other people of other faiths or other denominations believe, don't ask their enemies. And how about number two? This one is also too often done. Don't compare your best to their worst. Okay, that's way, 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 way too easy, especially when we live in 24-hour news cycles and instant internet. We can find out the worst things about other religions at the blink of an eye. And then we start to get puffed up, as the Apostle Paul might say. We start to think that, well, our religion, my religion, would never do that, when all it takes is a little bit of digging and research to find out that each religion has a best and each religion has a worst. Now, when it comes to the best, this is my favorite rule, number 3 of Christer Stendahl's rules for interreligious dialogue. Leave room for holy envy. Leave room for holy envy. You should, in encountering the best of religious traditions across the face of the earth, each religion having its best, you should be inspired by other traditions. You should be inspired by the lengths to which people will go to find out the truth and to experience the divine and beauty in the world. In fact, this holy envy became the source, the title of a book that I have used in my own teaching. It's Barbara Brown Taylor's Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And she herself is a Christian minister who was asked to teach a world religions course at a small college in Georgia. And it's her basically taking you through a semester of what it's like to teach from her own point of view. And I've found it a wonderful read, and I highly recommend it. But also, you can see elsewhere on this slide, one of my former professors at Union Theological Seminary, Professor Paul Knitter, wrote a book that it's called Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian. And he knows darn well how controversial that title is. But he's a world-renowned theologian of world religions and a former Catholic priest. He studied with some of the most brilliant theological minds of the 20th century at the Vatican. And yet he's saying in this title, without Buddha, he could not be a Christian. Engagement with another faith, having some holy envy for the Buddhist tradition, has made him a better Christian. Now, that leads me to my final question for you through FaithU in this session. How can you incorporate holy envy into your spiritual life? Now, I ask this as if you haven't already incorporated some holy envy into your spiritual life, but perhaps you could also ask yourself or ask those around you, do you already have some holy envy in your life? If so, talk about that. Or if you don't, like I say, how can you incorporate some holy envy into your spiritual life? I can tell you right off the bat, for example, it was written in the stars that I'd be a religion professor, because when I was going to Mason City High School, I would find out about these new religious traditions, and I just couldn't read enough about them. And I wanted to convert. But then I realized that no, I could learn about these other traditions and just improve my own faith. And so I encourage you to find that holy envy. Leave room for it, as Krister Stendahl says. Leave room for it when you engage in interreligious dialogue with people of other faiths. But also, see how you can incorporate holy envy into your daily spiritual life. In closing, here again are my questions for discussion that I hope you'll engage in after this session. First of all, how do you define the term religion? If you're talking about religions of the world with the goal of interreligious dialogue and understanding, it's kind of hard if you can't even agree on what a religion is. So ask yourself, what is a religion? How do you see exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your lives? Now, that could be your religious or your spiritual lives, or in any facet of your life. But for the sake of religions of the world, how do you see exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism in your spiritual and your religious lives? And lastly, how can you incorporate holy envy into your spiritual life if you haven't already? I hope that these will provide fodder for great discussion and thought. And lastly, let me simply say again, thank you. I'm so honored to have been part of FaithU. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and thank you very much for joining me, and God bless.